Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We're champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Sero Boost. And on this week's episode, we are going to talk about beauty beyond measure, awe-inspiring encounters with excellence. What a beautiful name for a topic. I saw it for the first time and I was kind of taken aback. So I was like, I didn't think I was going to talk about this kind of a topic. And very excited to talk to our guest today about this topic. Our guest is Kirk J. Schneider, Ph.D. He is a leading spokesperson for Existential-Humanistic and Existential-Integrative Psychology, an adjunct faculty member at Saybrook University, and formerly teaches College, Columbia University, and a co-founder and current president of the award-winning Existential-Humanistic Institute. He was also a 2022 candidate for president-elect of the American Psychological Association, APA. Apologies, that's a long word. Dr. Schneider is also the author or co-author of 15 books, including Awakening to Awe, The Polarized Mind, The Depolarizing of America. Very interesting name of a book. And his most recent book, Life Enhancing Anxiety, Key to a Sane World. Welcome to the show, Kirk. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Lou.
Yeah, well, I am in awe, to kind of, pun intended, because you have worked for so many different organizations. You've got a lot of books that you have written or co-written on topics that are probably not, the everyday topics, I would say. So I'm guessing the audience is just as curious as I am right now. Why did you choose to do this? Why did you choose to just write books about awe and anxiety and all the different things? And also, how did you get here in your career?
It's a very long story, but I'll try to keep it very short and succinct. Basically, I think that you can trace a lot of my interests, my passions, and my career to my early childhood when I experienced major trauma with the death of my 7-year-old brother when I was about 2.5. And as you can imagine, that totally turned the family upside down, threw my parents for a real loop, if you will, and life completely changed after that point. But they had the foresight to send me to a psychotherapist, a child psychoanalyst, actually, which was very rare in those times, and also in the neighborhood I grew up in, which was kind of a working class, middle class neighborhood. But my mother especially had an attunement to that kind of therapy because she was in it herself after her son died. And so the long and the short of it is that I was basically living a life of extreme terror. I had a lot of fearful dreams. I had night terrors. I was afraid of monsters and witches and disease and death. There was so many unknowns I was surrounded by, and I was such a young kid. And I had a lot of emotional extremes, even up to 5 and 6 years old. And that was the point where I saw this child psychoanalyst. And I would say that he and then another existential psychotherapist in my graduate years when I was kind of reactivated with this trauma, I had very big challenges with anxiety and panic. These were two people who basically helped me turn my life around and may have helped to salvage my life in many ways. And one of the ways that he did this early childhood analyst, is by being solid as a rock. I mean, he was so steady and strong in his kind of holding, if you will, creating a holding environment for me, that helped me to feel less afraid of these parts of myself that I was terrorized by, and helped me to internalize more of an approach of support and understanding rather than terror and devaluation and feeling helpless and groundless. And so I basically moved from a place of gradual terror and paralysis to beginning to become curious about my fears, my struggle, to become intrigued by it, to ask questions about it, and slowly to actually have a kind of a sense of wonder about what has opened up in my world, because I, like not too many people, was ripped open at a very young age, from the safe and familiar fabric of living, if you will, is a tear. And suddenly I'm in a completely lost and kind of open space and grasping for straws. But the other side of that, the other side of the panic around that, is if you can stay with it, if you can learn to stay with it and work with it, which he helped me to do, you begin to see some interesting aspects, like big questions about life, like what is this life about? In my own way as a little kid. How do I live more fully? How do I begin to, create some meaning of this life rather than just being in this free fall and this panic? And it opened up kind of creativity in me and increasing interest in reading and in watching movies, especially about science fiction, because that was about these strange worlds and creatures and so on. And I related a lot to that. And also the whole realm of human experience and behavior, asking questions about why do we have such fears? Why do we have such struggles? Why do I have these? So looking into myself, but also I began looking at people in the world and society. And my father was a humanistic educator and teacher, and he worked with me on a tape recorder. This is very early 1960s, very crude reel-to-reel tape recorder. But he supported me to do skits and to do talks on the tape recorder, even at 5, 6 years old. And we did skits together. And he really encouraged my creativity. And I had a whole stable of toy figures that I turned into like a Hollywood studio. And so I created movies, drawings of what these people are supposed to look like. And anyway, it became a time of tremendous struggle, but also growth. And I think my biggest learning was something like the analogy of being in a dark basement. When you're in a dark basement, at first, objects seem very menacing. They seem like they're going to hurt you, or you run into something. or somebody or something is going to jump out of the corner. You don't know what's going to happen when you're in a dark basement. But if you can hang in there for a while, if you can stay with it, your eyes begin to adjust to the light, and you start to see, oh, there's something that maybe I could use in that basement, or play with, or maybe even actually have fun with and enjoy. And so curiosity gradually opens up more and more as your eyes adjust to the light, and it's a whole different scene. So that's the analogy I would use to how I shifted from abject terror of the unknown and that which is different and other to gradual, incremental curiosity, wonder, and discovery of the unknown. And that set me off on my huge journey toward becoming a psychologist eventually. And I love this field. It's a field where it's filled with unknowns, right? When you're seeing patients, you don't know what's going to evolve. You don't know quite what their story is, especially at the beginning. That may not match what you get into later on. You can go a lot deeper. And so I'm very engaged and fascinated with the human journey, our struggles, as well as our aspirations for a more meaningful and, I would say, awe-based life. We can get into that later.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing your story with us. And, parts of it have definitely been really heartbreaking. And, to be able to get here, I'm sure it hasn't been easy. And you've definitely encountered with a lot of challenges. But, I guess, I think on this show, we sort of discussed a long time ago the concept of, post-traumatic growth and, how sometimes trauma can really shape who we are and what we do in life. And I think your story is definitely one of those examples. So thank you for sharing. I know it's not easy to talk about it, and we've got to know you a lot better. But we have a section we called "Have You Met Kirk?" to get to know you even better. And this is to know you through some of the things that you love. And the first question that we always ask, and my favorite question to ask, is, "What's your favorite book?"
Ooh, I've got a top 5, but if I was to choose one, I would choose Ernest Becker's Denial of Death. To me, that's the Bible of contemporary psychology. He's a cultural anthropologist, but he wrote one of the most illuminating and in-depth works about the human condition that I've ever read. And it draws from other heroes of mine like Soren Kierkegaard, who's an existential philosopher, and Otto Rank, who was Freud's secretary for 20 years, but then went off on his own and developed an existential psychoanalysis. But basically, what engages me about Becker's Denial of Death is that he really highlights the problem, the challenge of death and dying as the basic problem for humanity, and how it drives us to do so many things to cover it up and to avoid any hint of it, especially death anxiety. He calls it a complex symbol, and death anxiety can certainly take many manifestations. What I draw from it is not necessarily the finality of death, but it's more the shock of it, the radical mystery of it, and the unknown of it, the unpredictability, which makes us feel groundless and helpless around that topic, because nobody knows, as far as I know, what's going to happen and what it does to us. We do know that it's a tremendous shift from our lives. So he talks about how denial of death manifests in all kinds of defenses, everything from the individual psychopathologies that we can get into, which narrow our world and keep us from experiencing a fuller range of our thoughts, feelings, behaviors, imagination, to collective problems like the identification with one's country, extreme nationalism, extreme ethnocentrism, identifying with one's ethnic group to the point of putting down other ethnic groups or putting down other countries. Identification with great weaponry, how we display our weapons on parades often, how much pride we take in having guns and having tanks, having these super powerful bombs, etc. All these ways that we pump ourselves up and give us the illusion of power and control, the illusion that we are invulnerable, basically, that we don't have any death anxiety or we don't need to deal with it. And in our society, more and more now, even this book was written 50 years ago, but now we have even more ways to deny death. In our quick fix, instant result world, we've got our handheld devices, our smartphones, our quick entertainments, our kind of quick images that we exchange with each other and make ourselves look great or whatever. Quick answers that we get from Alexa or whatever devices we use to give us quick answers to problems. Basically, we were sort of on a very fast-paced kind of lifestyle that doesn't enable us to slow down very much and to encounter and to work with this primal anxiety, as I would call it. He calls it death anxiety, and I call it the primal terror of the unknown, which I was alluding to earlier, that I experienced as a kid. But I would actually trace it back to the point of birth. And this is what Otto Rank talks about in his book, The Trauma of Birth. And I think a number of studies have really upheld his thesis, which is that radical shift from relative non-being and unity with the mother and with the cosmos to sudden abrupt being and chaos is probably the template for virtually all future anxiety and trauma that we experience. It's in the background, in the shadow, is that basic groundlessness and helplessness we experience when we're thrown into life without the equipment and the skills to work with her. Yeah, and so that's why we often feel in a free fall, or like we're in a black hole when we're in these places. And we do so much to try to avoid it.
That's fascinating. Definitely a new topic. I haven't heard of that book before, so I'll put that on my list. How about a movie you've enjoyed recently?
Oh, there's been a lot of good movies lately. So,
yeah, it's hard to choose.
It is. A recent movie that I appreciated a great deal is The Whale, a movie about a 400-pound man who's an English teacher who works online with his students. But his encounter with deeper things and more meaningful things than his obsession with food, which was, again, based on a denial and a defensiveness against going into his primal anxieties, which had to do with some family situations I won't go into. But his growth through the process, I'm talking about emotional growth through the process, was so powerful, I found. And his encounter with his daughter was part of that. and his encounter with a evangelical young man, trying to convince him to adopt a very strict religious view, and his caretaker as well. I mean, they all kind of challenged him to look more deeply at his life and what really matters about his life. So I think that was one of the best acted films, and also as a character study, and we don't see that too often. It takes place basically in one room and one setting, just like the great theater, the great plays in the theater, because they're about character. Those are the kind of films I love. I loved This American Fiction. I thought that was fascinating recently. Yeah. And also a film called Origin. It's a beautiful film about deeper questions about how are we going to live our lives, and also this fundamental problem of confronting the other and that which is different. In those cases, they're about race or class, and they sort of imply some pathways to how we can, and we need to, work with our primal fears of the unknown and that which is different, so that we can have more inner freedom and we can relate to each other more as whole human beings rather than stereotypes or labels. Because that's all fear-based as far as I'm concerned. I wrote a whole book about that called The Polarized Mind.
Yeah, interesting.
I was just going to say, which is the fixation on a single point of view to the utter exclusion of competing points of view.
Yeah.
And that's basically what Becker was talking about too, with the defense against death anxiety. Try to make yourself invulnerable, absolute, totally certain. Then you have no problems, right?
Yes.
Until you face challenges that challenge that illusion.
Yeah, I guess in a way that's relatable to our topic today too. So, I'll definitely check out those films that you mentioned. They're all new to me as well. So next question is about a podcast. I'm not sure if you're a podcast listener yourself. If you are, what is your favorite show?
Well, I've been on about 50 podcasts. I'm much more familiar with being a guest than listening, but I do like to listen periodically, especially to my son's girlfriend, who is a host of a show called The Big Take for Bloomberg News.
Yeah, cool.
And her name is Sarah Holder. And so a shout out to Sarah. She does a wonderful job covering news that's related to business, but also community and how to live a better life.
I'm sure she'd be very happy to know that you gave her a shout out, and that sounds like a fascinating show too. So thank you for sharing.
It's very good. It's very good.
Yeah. That's good. How about a role model? Do you have a role model in life?
I've had several role models in life for sure. I've been very blessed to have been the student of two of the greatest psychologists of the 20th century, I would say, and the founding fathers of existential-humanistic psychology, Rollo May, who's written some wonderful books that are still available: Love and Will, Freedom and Destiny, Power and Innocence, The Cry for Myth, many wonderful books. And James Bugental, who is my clinical psychology mentor and supervisor, and his wife, Elizabeth. And James Bugental has also written some wonderful books like The Search for Existential Identity, Psychotherapy and Process. And psychotherapy isn't what you think. It's a play on words, because he's talking about how it really deals at the deeper level with emotions and not so much figuring it out, but learning to be more present to your emotions. So those are two major figures. Other heroes, many of the mentors that I've had were my heroes. Don Rice, a mentor in my master's program at State University of West Georgia, who introduced me to many of the people I was talking about before in the school that I went to, which was Saybrook University. And that's where those mentors were, and that's where he graduated. And he worked with R.D. Laing, who I got to know through workshops and love his books, like The Divided Self and Politics of Experience. Stanley Krippner, I was a work study student for him. He was also at Saybrook University. This is 40 years ago. And he was a consciousness researcher, and he investigated all kinds of interesting phenomena, psychic phenomena, telepathy and remote viewing and some of the shamanic ceremonies that they do in, various parts of the world. So he would travel a lot, and I would hear a lot about his work. And he was a wonderful speaker as well, and writer.
Great.
So these are just amazing people that I've come across.
It's good to know you have so many people you can learn from and look up to. And finally, in this part, I would love to ask you about a course you've taken. This could be from a long time ago, but it's still influential.
A course that I've taken.
Yes.
Probably the most important course that I took was with James Bugenthal, and it was my very first semester at Saybrook University for my Ph.D. program. This was in 1980. And it was called the mentorship program. It was a 9-month-long mentorship. Unbelievable, where this very respected psychologist, pioneering psychologist, basically opened his life to us. We would meet with him every couple of weeks for practicing the psychotherapy, the existential-humanistic psychotherapy that he helped to pioneer. So he would teach us about it, talk about it, and then we would also visit other luminaries in the field, like Rollo May. That was, I think, the first time that I met Rollo May at his home. And it was just 10 students, so it was a very small, intimate group. And we did that type of thing for 9 months, every couple of weeks, as well as experiential work where we're actually role-playing the approach, the existential-humanistic therapy approach. So it was such a rich course. It covered both the didactic teaching element and the experiential element where we were actually living the issues and the questions that we were talking about.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, thank you for sharing that. I guess that was probably from a long time ago, but it sounds like you still remember. You still remember it vividly. So that's good.
I do.
Yeah. So now let's talk about today's topic, beauty beyond measure, awe-inspiring encounters with excellence. Again, I think such a beautiful name for a topic. I don't think I've had such an artistic name for a topic before. And this topic is in the context of our happiness and the science of happiness. So I would love to understand from your personal perspective, what does happiness mean?
It can mean a lot of things. I like to think of happiness as a kind of a light and airy feeling of a degree of play and maybe humor, maybe pleasurable feelings, thoughts. Frankly, I believe that, at least for many people, there are dimensions beyond happiness that can be much more gratifying, especially in the long run. Happiness seems to me to be maybe more of a passing feeling. And this isn't for everybody. This is my perspective and what I've researched, through the years as well. So I would distinguish happiness from deeper emotions like joy and awe, the sense of awe, AWE, toward living, because these involve one's whole bodily experience. And what I call the whole enchilada, the good, the bad, and the ugly. A capacity to roam within, arrange within, meaning being able to be with our most vulnerable and difficult feelings, as well as our most exuberant and bold and expansive feelings. Mm-hmm. It's a kind of fluid center, as I call it.
Yeah.
It's a capacity to live a whole life, because those so-called sad, dysphoric feelings, sadness, anger, envy, anxiety, certainly they can be overwhelming and horrifying, but if we can learn to work with them, they can also be gateways to a greater sensitivity about life and about other people and the people we love. They bring a sense of poignancy to living that you might not otherwise have if you're just, all kind of cheerful or happy and kind of living at that, what I would consider a surface level of pleasure, perhaps, but not fuller gratification, like a more fully gratifying life. And to me, that's a life that's well lived. It's a life that deeply matters to somebody. And usually to get to what deeply matters, one has to do some inner work. To get there, one has to learn how to work with these difficult places, these places we blocked off. That death anxiety I talked about before, that sense of groundlessness and helplessness that's so primal behind much of our anxiety or trauma. And, if you think about it, I mean, what do you know or what do we know that is genuinely successful and enduring that does not involve hard work? There aren't too many things, it seems to me. Whether it's a relationship, a creative project, a spiritual connection with living, it takes some time and it takes practice to work with those places, because precisely they're so great because they do challenge you. They put you on the edge of wonder
definitely.
And discovery. And that involves working with your anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you sort of debunked a lot of misconceptions there as well, because, people might think that, it comes naturally. 'Cause for some people, it kind of goes, okay, happiness is just there and I don't really need to work on it. But I think it actually takes a lot of work. And that's what we've learned through this show, for example. It doesn't just come to us. Sometimes it does, if we...
sometimes it does. And some people only need that level of happiness. That's
but
okay,
it's
not
like
everyone.
That all the time. If we really want to work on it, then, we need to put in a lot of time to understand the different facets of happiness. Like you said, it's so many different things. And yes, it can come to us, but that's just not how it's always going to work, especially if you want more happiness in life. And I think it takes more work. And, today's topic is about awe and, all these encounters with excellence. I think awe is such a nice word, and we don't use it as often as we should, So how would you define awe, especially for our audience who might not have used this word in potentially years? How can we look out for it?
Well, first let me say that it's a capacity to be deeply moved by something. I think that's fundamental. And that speaks to what I was describing earlier about learning to be more present to ourselves and to others in this, fear, in this primal fear of that which is unknown and different. Because one needs to come to terms with that to a maximal degree to be deeply moved. One needs to be more comfortable in one's own skin, if you want to put it that way. Live with one's whole body experience. So that's what I think awe is drawing from. That's sort of the well that awe draws from. I define awe as the humility and wonder, or sense of adventure toward living. What I mean by that is it's a capacity, again, to be present with one's deepest dreads and one's most dazzling desires. The whole enchilada. So that means, it could mean experiencing that in being with your lover, right? And, staring into her world, or being so appreciative of who this person is before you and the mystery of who they are. It could mean being in front of a sunset or an amazing scene in nature, mountains. It could be, something climatic, like thunder and lightning. Hopefully it's not threatening your life directly. And in fact, it's very hard to experience a sense of awe, one humility and wonder and sense of adventure toward living. The closer you're in the radius of immediate danger, that's when all bets are off.
Yeah.
You really can't take the time to pause and be with the feelings, sensations that come up.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really good in terms of examples, because I guess for a lot of people they might think awe is something that you sort of come across, and it's not always like something that you can look out for, perhaps. But you give that example of a sunset, and I feel like we probably take that for granted from time to time. So to me, it sounds more like, this sense of awe can be cultivated. It's not that you have to wait for something amazing to happen.
That's right. And that's what I want to emphasize. And I want to bring it down from these rarefied heights of, let's say, certain religions, have that view, awe of God. Fine, that's great. But I'm really speaking about an everyday awe. One of the marvelous things about cultivating a sense of awe is that it's an endless well of possibility that one can draw from at any moment. I mean, theoretically, at any moment, the more one is open to it. So it can just be a moment of amazement toward the fact that we're alive. And we're just this sort of this flash between two voids, right? Birth and death. And so that in itself is astonishing. We have this opportunity. And I'm not saying it's great for everyone by any means. I'm not trying to sugarcoat it. But what I'm saying is, if we can learn to cultivate the sense of awe, the sense of adventure toward living to the degree possible every day and even moment to moment, that's a wonderful gift. And obviously we can't do it all the time. We've got some practical things we have to attend to. And again, sometimes it's too scary to try to open up too much. But my point is that it is always there. It's available if we can tap in. there have been some amazing people who have been in some very oppressive circumstances who have cultivated this sensibility. And I'm thinking of people like Viktor Frankl in the death camps, was able to use his inner freedom in the middle of the most depraved circumstances one can imagine of a Nazi death camp, and use his freedom to imagine his wife smiling at him on a sunny day, and how moving that was and how lifting that was for him, helped him to survive.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's no key to surviving those situations. He was very lucky he survived generally, but he did talk in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, about how those prisoners who could use that transcendent function within were often more able to cope with the most difficult circumstances than others.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's actually quite interesting, because the way that we were talking about happiness as a concept earlier and the way that you're talking about awe as a concept now are very similar. So what I mean by that is, we said happiness can come to us. Same thing. We can come across something that would, give us a sense of awe, but we can actually proactively work on it. Actually, as if, we're working on our happiness, we can actually, focus on cultivating that sense of awe out of ordinary experiences, just like what you were saying. And I guess that is probably the biggest problem when it comes to this concept, because people might most likely think that I need to wait for something amazing to happen to have this sense of awe. Well, in fact, we have learned in the past few minutes that we can actually cultivate it and bring it to life through our own ability to, see things differently. And, maybe just recall something in the past that would bring that sense of awe.
That's right. It can be a practice for people.
Yeah.
And I know we talked earlier about these lenses of awe that I offer as an exercise that I offer in my book, Awakening to Awe.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's helpful now for me to
absolutely.
quickly
we
summarize.
were supposed to discuss the lenses of awe. So what are they?
So, well, I'm trying, I use the word lenses because I'm trying to help people see that this can be a practical exercise and something they can relate to. So I'm trying to give the analogy of putting on a pair of glasses to see into situations more deeply and more awesomely, if you will. So that's what I mean by the lenses of awe. And I talk about, first of all, the lens of what I call the lens of transience, or the passing nature of time and life. So if we can take a few moments, and all of this involves slowing down and pausing, those are fundamental to cultivating more of a sense of awe. So if we can take a few moments and maybe even close our eyes and envision something, a person, place, or thing that is near and dear to you, and then put on the lens of the passing nature of time and life, and experience this person, let's say, from that lens, from the realization that every moment's passing, that what you experience right now will no longer ever be there. And can you stay with that, or can you savor that? Can you savor that fact? Can you savor the moment that you're with this person or this object? And really begin to notice the person or object, and begin to open up feelings, sensations that connect with it, images. And then I talk about the lens of wonder and surprise. So can you find a place in yourself that opens to the wonder of this person or this thing? Can you let it surprise you in some way? Can instead of kind of, presuming that you're going to connect with it in the same old way and it's the same old routine, can you put all that on the shelf and open yourself to the possibility, hey, something new can happen at this moment with this person. I try to do that in psychotherapy too. I think that's really important, to come with a sense of wonder and not just presume, because they're a depressive or they're an obsessive, that's how I have to relate to them at every moment. I try to be open to the person as a human being. And you can bring some of that yourself. Maybe you shift gears, instead of saying the same old thing to that person, or having the same old conversation. You switch tracks. Try asking them something else, or relating something that's on your mind that really fascinated you, and see where that lands. So being open to surprise. Then there's the lens of connection with something greater than ourselves. Can we see in that object or that person its connection with something more than itself, or their self, and our connection with something more than ourselves, our connection with the vastness of life, with the vastness of the universe. We're all a part of that, and if we can begin to open to how we're connected to something greater than ourselves, that can lift us into that place of humility and wonder, sense of adventure as well, and often lifts us from unfortunately, the all too typical narrow and petty identifications that we usually hold toward ourselves and others, which is very judgmental or negative or devaluing. It lifts us to deeper, wider possibilities. And then there's the lens of intricacy, as I call it. So noticing details about the person, place, or thing. Really homing in on what are subtle details we didn't notice before. Something about their smile, something about the way they hold themselves, or clothing that they wear, or a feeling you get about the person or the thing or the place you didn't notice. Coming at it with a more subtle eye. I mean, many of these skills are skills that artists use too, by the way. And that's why they can see the extraordinary in the ordinary, because they're very good at noticing. So the lens of intricacy, noticing the subtleties and details. Then there's the lens of emotion, especially refined emotion, being able to learning how to experience the world, others, through sentiment, and not just with one's head, not just intellectually, but again, with more with one's whole body experience, opening to what one is feeling about that person, or place, or thing. And that certainly puts us on the road to this greater capacity to be moved and sense of adventure. And finally, the last lens is the lens of solitude. And that's learning to be alone, which we, again, I think too often either don't do in our society, or we don't learn the beauty and the importance of being able to be present to ourselves in undistracted places, times. And it's something like befriending oneself. It's learning to be more aware, more present to the more of who we are. And I'm not talking about fixating on any one thing. I'm talking about a more mindful observing of the different thoughts, feelings, imaginings that come up for us.
Yeah.
As we stay with ourselves, maybe on a walk, or just taking a few moments to pause in your office or in your room to, to learn to be more present. I mean, that's where it begins. If it doesn't start with an inner home, it's not going to happen very
Absolutely.
sustainably by grasping on the outside for something.
Yeah,
it has to begin with us.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, lots of different lenses there. And I guess, now the big question is, how do we actually apply that into our daily lives, right? Because we know the theory now. So let's get to our practice and habits section and recommend something to our audience that they can try today, after listening to this conversation. So what would you recommend in terms of a simple practice or a habit so that they can cultivate, a sense of awe using one of those lenses perhaps, or maybe even all of them, different ways to try?
Yeah, I would say just begin with getting in an undistracted place, taking 15, 20 minutes out of your week, and doing this on a walk or, again, in a private room, a private space where you feel safe. And begin working with one or a number of the lenses. It might be good to just begin with a kind of a cultivation of learning to go inward. So maybe begin by becoming aware of your breathing. And it's very helpful to draw your breaths from your diaphragm, from your belly, up through your chest and out your nose and mouth, and to just be with that. Try to shift from all this sort of monkey mind where you're aware of, you're latched on to all these other things or the problems of the day. Just see if you can be with the breathing, hearing and feeling the breathing as a way to begin. And then, let's say on your walk or in your room, check in with what's most fully present for you in that moment. Maybe it's noticing some flowers, leaves, a tree, or the fresh air that you're breathing, whatever it is. Or in your room, noticing something that touches you. And see if you can just begin by staying present to that and associating to it. Especially, thoughts, yes, but especially feelings, body sensations, images that come up for you as you stay with that. Maybe put on that lens of awe, the lens of transience, the passing nature of time and life, and what does that bring to you?
Yeah, actually, that reminds me of something very funny from the TV show Friends. I remember this episode because I think that's actually similar to what you're saying, but it's like to a different degree. It's actually hilarious. There was a character, it was like a 1 episode character or 2 episode character, and he was constantly in awe of everything. Even, they were having a fight as a couple and they were like, this is such a fantastic fight. Don't you think this is the greatest fight you'd ever have? And I remember that. I was like, wow, it was hilarious, first of all. But second of all, I think it's just like, this is quite rare for anyone to have that attitude, to approach anything. And I guess that's one of the lenses of awe. It could be that, sometimes it's too annoying for other people. But, that is so positive that it was kind of funny to me. And I remember that when you mentioned all these different examples. And so I think, we can probably try practicing what you just mentioned on the walk, in a situation that happens. Maybe it's a busy day. You probably don't have time to go for a walk, but it can be something that happens during your day and you notice how extraordinary that is, out of the ordinary. And that could also be considered awe.
Yeah, let me give you an example from another favorite movie of mine, which is called American Beauty.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember the scene. This is a movie with Kevin Spacey.
I actually haven't watched it, so
okay. Well,
I will watch it.
He's a typical American dad who has a kind of midlife crisis and is starting to question the conventional ways that he's been living and his family's been living and the way they've been communicating and how they've been just navigating the world. But there's one scene where his daughter, a young woman, a teenager, is also being affected by his opening up to seeing more about the world. And she goes next door to a neighbor who's just watching the most mundane thing you can imagine, but doing something very similar to what you just described in Friends.
Yeah.
And that is being fascinated. He's watching television and he's fascinated by this bag, plastic bag, slowly drifting to the ground.
Yeah.
And it's very slow.
Yep.
And at first she's kind of taken aback. But then, as he's describing it, you see how poetic that is? You see how amazing that is?
Yeah.
Do you feel that?
Yeah.
The way it is moving?
Yeah.
Can you feel that in yourself? And she starts getting into that. I mean, these sound a little offbeat, but point being,
I
you
can
can
totally
experience
understand. Yeah.
the sense of awe in just about anything if
Exactly.
you can open to the bigger picture.
Yeah, definitely.
To the more of what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. I think it's actually like an ability that we can cultivate. At the end of the day, it can be weird, especially if you're kind of looking at the plastic bag, just floating, and you're kind of like, oh, that's amazing. But yeah, I think we just take a lot of things for granted nowadays because modern world, modern society, there's just so many things that we're like, oh yeah, I see that every day. I think in Australia there's a word blasé, and I think I heard that someone said that the other day, and they were like, oh, you're not blasé, and I was like, okay, that's interesting because that's the opposite of awe. You still see everything as if it's the first time, and yeah, I think that's a really good recommendation. So now that we've covered, the theoretical aspect of it, the different lenses of all, a practice that our audience can try. Now it's time for your open mic before we close. So take it away, Kirk.
Well, if people are interested in learning more about this approach, some of these experiences, I would direct them to my website, which is kirkjschneider.com. And it's filled with examples, videos, interviews that I've done, with books and descriptions of books that address this issue. And I would also encourage folks to look at my new YouTube channel, which I'm developing with a graduate student, Tyler Gamlin. And the YouTube channel is called Core of Depth Healers, Core like Peace Corps, CORPS. And it's basically a resource mainly for people involved in the mental health field, but it could be anyone who's interested in exploring ways of translating deeper ways of seeing, deeper ways of working with people therapeutically, translating those principles to addressing social crises, like political divisions that we deal with now. So there are a number of examples of these bridge-building dialogues. Some I'm involved with, called the Experiential Democracy Dialogue, which brings people of very contrasting political and cultural backgrounds together to not to debate a particular issue, but to learn about and understand each other's point of view. And what we found is that these are very humanizing dialogues, and they help us move beyond the quick labeling and stereotyping that we so often do, because they're aiming at, again, helping us to be more present. And there's a number of exercises in in those that help us to be more present and come less from a fear-based place toward each other and more from a present-based place. So that might be of interest. And we have videos of especially therapists who are talking about working with deeper levels of the deeper roots of gun violence or of struggle with the pandemic and isolation. There's a whole variety of issues in that. I would also recommend that people see my most recent book, which is called Life Enhancing Anxiety. You mentioned it, which is basically learning to develop the capacity to live on the edge of wonder and discovery and not just terror and overwhelm. So to work with that primal anxiety, that terror of the unknown, in ways that help us develop more of an inner freedom. And I talk about my own journey with that in some detail, including my own psychoanalyst notes, which I was able to get about me like 30 years later. But I have a lot of examples of that, of life-enhancing anxiety, and people like Viktor Frankl, who have learned to come into those freer places in the most difficult circumstances. Awakening to awe, rediscovery of awe, the spirituality of awe. These are all books that I've written about awe, especially in the context of our quick fix, instant result world. And how do we bring more of that sense of awe to living in this world? So those are some examples of resources that people can look to.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, and thanks again for joining us. We could go on about this conversation. I think there's just so much more to discuss, especially given how many books you've written on the topic. So we potentially will revisit it another time, hopefully. But for today, thank you. And thanks again for joining us in the evening, your time.
Oh, thanks so much for the opportunity, Lu. I very much enjoyed and appreciated connecting with you on this.
You have been listening to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast produced by the Happiness Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website, ha.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.